See you again. I had thought we had taped that other program at the house, but
That was in the open studio here.
Welcome once again to
Thank you.
MNN.
Thanks for having me again.
Things are getting better and better and better all the time here.
Oh, here, yeah.
Yeah, they are
well,
here. I'm happy to report.
Wonderful to have an outlet.
Not necessarily the case in the nation as a whole.
Outside this building,
or
yes.
Iraq.
Right.
Yeah, and anyway, welcome very much to Conversations. It's a pleasure to welcome to the program Daniel Nalven, and he's a activist. He's a human rights activist. He has been for a very long period of his time, genuinely concerned about the human condition and the lot of some of our less advantaged people and the inappropriate way in which we tend to organize things, and he's been involved in that for a long time. I think it's fair to say he's involved in the 9/11 Truth movement.
It's one of our current most important features, yes.
I think it is.
Yes.
It is indeed. He's there. And we're here to talk about the state of the world in a certain sense, the state of the progressive critique of the situation here on planet Earth, that sort of thing. And Daniel, welcome really very much to Conversation.
Thank you very much. Well, humankind's condition is in very serious condition right now. Very serious trouble
you
right now.
You do, yeah. You've been concerned with that for, share just maybe a little bit background. You've been involved in human rights issues way back in your early part of your life.
From high school on, right. I've always considered human rights to be a leading direction of anybody's life, is that everybody needed to have a chance to get ahead, a chance to be heard.
Yeah, opportunity.
Right, opportunity is very important.
I think that thing that Eleanor wrote, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, is a foundational kind of statement, don't you? I think it's a good one.
Yes, well, that's become part of the manifesto of the American Humanist Association, the Declaration of Human Rights.
You're involved. You count yourself a humanist, do you?
I do count myself a humanist.
Have you been like that a long time, or your adult life, or were you brought up in a humanist background, your family and that sort of thing?
I was always brought up in a background where fairness was almost above everything else.
Oh, really?
I always tried to be fair. In any endeavor, you always tried to do something in a fair
That was an important ethic that was encouraged in
was instilled in me.
Dinner table and all that kind of stuff of your family. Were your family political or that, or concerned? No.
They were concerned, yes. Politically, no. I think I'm one of 3 siblings, and of course, when you have 3 children in a household, and everybody's always looking for the bigger half. That was always taught. Very early on, I was always taught, okay, you can cut, but someone else gets the pick when you're going to share something.
Oh, I see. That's interesting. That's an interesting. I haven't thought that. You can cut, but if somebody else gets to pick, that's interesting. Yeah. So that a sense of ethics and fairness was important.
Yes.
That's important grounding stuff, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. That's very good. So, what you got some education behind you, or not, or
mostly autodidactic? But I have some technology education. I went to school for engineering in the late '60s and didn't finish my schooling. Kent State hit in my freshman year. 1970.
Yeah, that was a magic year in my in my calculus. 1970 is likely to go down as year 1 in the fullness of human history.
Well, it's year 1 in the Unix history.
In what?
Unix history.
Oh, in
the Unix operating system actually is all dated from January 1st, 1970.
Is it really?
It's its inception, yes.
I happened to look up the other day that the Nobel Prize thing, the Nobel Prize in Chemistry and Physics, that kind of goes back to 1900 or so. But the Economics Prize only goes to 1969-70. That's when the first prize in economics goes, too. So in a lot of different things, you know, it's just interesting that they only brought that in.
The end of that decade was pivotal in our condition, right?
I do, too, yeah.
Yeah, you had global powers battling it out just past the big war. Yeah. And then they were battling it out for resources in the Far East.
Yeah, they'd been doing that a long time, but in a certain, if I may, in a certain sense, going back in longer loops and so forth, you can go back to, you have all these, I really like, you're familiar with Ray Kurzweil?
No.
You know, he's got a book on the singularity is new, and the idea of singularities occurring in the evolution of events on this planet. Like I did a program last week or something with the foundation. They said 600 million years ago, all fauna was contained in unicellular spongiforms, and there was evolution out from that. But that was a singularity. There was I guess the Big Bang was a singularity.
You want to get into physics? Yeah, the singularity was the beginning of all.
Yeah, but there's been a series of singularities along various evolutionary paths, and then another singularity that occurred against which we can begin to measure the year 1970 was the emergence of Homo sapiens sapien, or our species, which comes along the hominian line, hominoid line. We had
Hominid
Australopithecine for some millions of years, and then we had Homo habilis, apparently, and then some 200,000 years ago, Homo sapien appeared. It could be from a single individual. Mitochondria is all measured through the female.
They supposedly trace from Eve back, yes.
Yeah, but I mean, that's a singularity that our self-reflective consciousness appeared in the evolution of consciousness, in a sense, you know. And so we've been here 200,000 years, apparently, our species. We got 6.5 billion now, or something like that. And now we're coming to a point where, through the extension of our capability, our consciousness, through the use of tools,
through our use
which
of
is pretty unique to humanity.
hands and minds, yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, most of the creatures really just have a relationship to the outer environment that is not able to change it.
They can't adapt to their environment.
They
right?
can't adapt to it,
Right,
nor do I think they have a self-reflective consciousness such as
that
we have.
I don't think we'll ever really know whether they can
Perhaps,
actually think, yeah. Because we have to look at that from their point of view. And how can you see that from a point of view of...
I try with my dog every day, but he doesn't seem to respond. All I know, he's got a very singular fixation on bones, I noticed, you know, and that kind of thing. But anyway, but now we get to the point where the extended consciousness is such that they tell us, as far as I can tell, Monsieur Kaku and some others who measure these kind of things, that it was around 1970 that the weapon systems that we had developed and have been the leading edge of our technology and power, extension of that, are such that if they were to be unleashed would mean, as it can be modeled, the end of the whole species, something that couldn't happen, it was not possible. We were impotent in that sense as recently as the Second World War.
The end of life, never mind just our species.
Well, the end of life, Michio Kaku has hinted that it could well be that which is pretty staggering. And we got to that point, not in 1945. I was born, I was 10 years old in 1945. It was about 1970 that we got to that line. That's pretty existentially significant, it seems
25 years.
Yeah, yeah, against 200,000.
Right. We're just moving forward at a hugely increased pace.
Right, and it's going exponentially.
Yes.
Now, the line is now going, it's not like, if they put the camera on me, the line is going, it's not going like this or coming like this now. It's not hyperbolic even, it's now exponential.
Right.
And it's going like that. And so that's a significant grounding information for making a claim that this time in which we live is not like all time, that this is something very unusual times that we live in. Do you have a sense of that, or is that stretching it
we have
too
to
far?
make it normal. Yeah, you are stretching it because we have to make it normal times. This is a time we live in, so you can try to live with it, or you certainly can't work against it. You have to try to make your most of it. And people need to understand that they can't know everything, they can't learn everything, but they still need to live and adapt with others and use others.
Yeah. We just laid out sort of things on the negative side, didn't we? When we said we can destroy everything.
Right.
I mean, destroying all of life, I mean, it seems to me pretty bad destroying the whole species.
You're trying to look at the positive side of it, which
well,
is
that's what I said. We sort of left out the positive side.
Is that number one?
That was pretty grim, you know.
Number one, we're here.
Yeah, it is. Do you realize how amazing it is that anything exists?
Yeah, certainly.
How tiny was the threshold of what was required for anything to occur?
Well,
I mean, or much less life.
And that we're just 50 kilos of some sort of protoplasm that has this capability to modify our environment.
Modify the environment through the use and the extension. That's extensions of consciousness into the environment. And there aren't very many
through our hands and minds into technology.
Right. And there aren't very many creatures can do that.
No.
But I also think we have a self-reflective consciousness that we can be aware of. What do you think about? I've tried to talk it over with my dog, but again, he doesn't seem to respond. But I mean, whether or not, you know, creatures are aware as we are, the big, one great big existential issue individually and otherwise, now we're spreading out to the species or something, is that we're aware of our demise, our death.
I think
that's a biggie, I think.
I touched on that previously in our discussion just before the show, is that how I consider the modern human to be basically immature. I said they aren't self-reflective.
Oh, okay.
We don't
develop,
look, we don't look. We're developmentally challenged. We just don't look beyond the here and now. I mean, we look at our bank accounts and we look at how long is our job and how we're going to retire. But do we even look at what our children's future is going to look like? Do we even consider, are they going to have a future? Are they going to be able to live on dry land, or are we going to have to, are they going to have to live in space? We just haven't looked beyond what the here and now.
Well, that's interesting. You don't think it's there even at a subconscious level, the fact that we're aware of our demise? I mean, that's been something that there's people who write on that, that's something there, maybe even subconsciously. We know we're going to die, and that's a great big negative that is there that we're aware of. And I don't think a crocodile, I mean, you're making suppositions, or a locust think or are aware of the fact that they're going to die.
People, that's so far suppressed these days that people, that's part of our major problem is people do not accept death. And you can see that in the medical profession, is that's where they're headed. Rather than helping the people for their current condition, they're just somehow delaying death. People have refused to accept that they are going to die. And that
well, that's a bit of biggie throughout. I bet they probably were addressing, Neanderthal used to bury, even Neanderthal was probably not Homo sapien, I think. I don't think it was incorporated. They used to
They weren't considered Homo sapiens, yeah.
I beg your pardon?
They weren't considered Homo sapiens, no. They
were not?
No.
I don't think so. The fellow in Michigan thinks that they were brought into the gene pool. But, I mean, there's argument, but it begins to look like they were not. But they would bury the people very carefully with flowers. It was clear even back, way back thousands of years ago. They had a concern for that.
They had a concern for the afterlife.
Perhaps. No, we're conjecturing, but perhaps, you know. But creatures don't, I don't think. Yeah.
That's very interesting too, because I'm a hunter and I've gone through the state courses, and we're taught that the animals don't relate this thing sticking into them to their dying. There's something that could be.
You mean like a bullet?
Bullet, an arrow. They say they don't relate that to their death. They don't relate that to their finalism, their end.
Right.
It's that they just, you know, there's some environmental thing that happened to them. So. Well,
that's what I'm saying. It's a mark. We have you know, you have this whole consciousness thing and everything, and we have a sort of apexing role in terms of the evolution of consciousness.
We like to think we do. We like
do
to think we like to think we're at the apex.
Yeah.
Are we really at the apex?
I mean, I don't know. What do you think?
We've been studying dolphins and whales, and we see all these other signs of some sort of intelligence. And can we call it that? We see them communicate. Is that intelligence?
They're very good at communicating. Some of them. Yeah.
Just past couple of days, I read a story about a species of monkey was seen to crudely sharpen the points of a stick to be used in hunting.
Yeah, Jane Goodall pointed that out, some of that.
And
they're used in hunting, or they use it to get termites out of a log. They can do that.
Well, they've been doing that, but they've actually seen this one species using it to stick animals.
Oh, that's like a tool maker.
Right.
That's like
now,
also,
is this the first time we've seen that? Is this the first time we've noticed it? Is this the first time it's happened? We don't know. I mean, it's all conjecture as to when this first happened, and it goes on to history in itself is only a man's story. Is that?
Yeah. As they say, history is written by the winners, and we're the and I see somewhere.
It's certainly continued by the winners, even though it may be written by the losers.
I think it's 99%. It's certainly the vast majority of the species that ever lived are extinct.
Right.
So we're a survivor in that sense and everything. And then it's a matter of criteria, I guess, by which you would judge what it's all about, Alfie, because it's all a seamless web. The Vedic mentality, everything is interrelated. It's a seamless web. The principle of Gaia is interesting, where they see the whole Earth as a life form.
One big symbiotic relationship.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that's very important because we don't know how we're affecting that. And we've only for the past 30 years have we known that we're somehow affecting it through climate change. It's still conjectured and still argued is man really partly responsible for the global warming, or is it some sort of cyclic occurrence? But you have to stepping back and looking at that in the big picture. You have to realize that we're affecting it one way or another. We're certainly affecting it, whether it's for the good or for the bad. Are we affecting it to the point where we're actually causing it damage is another story.
That's another issue too, because it could be that the idea that you're messing with it is something that is that the fact that we can influence it, there has a certain kind of Promethean power in that, you know. And there were people like, in the primordial ooze 600 million years ago, there would have been, I made a joke the other day with somebody I was doing a thing, I mean, you're there and you reach a certain stage, uniform cellular, uniform spongiforms, and there would be an impetus steady state or an impetus feminine, Eastern, something, that this is cool, this is fine, let's put up some curtains, and this is fine. But we would still be in the prime, but there's an impetus to change and an impetus to move and an impetus to go out. I don't know if that's male, female, Western technology or whatever.
And to think about coming from a single cell animal. It's just, how did that?
Well, the whole process.
Yeah,
there were singularities before that that made it possible. It's a wonder that it exists within a realm of tolerances that are just incredibly. You know, it's no wonder to say that happenstance and the oddities that can be occurring are there. But we've got that sort of a thing. But now we've reached a point where, in a certain sense, the singularity is near now. We're at a point where we can destroy the whole species. And I noticed they're making a new generation of atomic weapons. They're talking about technical nuclear weapons against some existential threat that some people feel and that sort of thing. They're juggling atomic weapons. The atomic weapons are still on hair trigger alert in silos. They're still there.
Well, the doomsday clock was moved forward
up to 5 minutes now. They just
yeah.
moved up from 7 to 5. Yeah, and that sort of thing. And you know, they had said, well, we defeated the commies, the Soviet Union version of the commies, so everything's okay now because we, the good guys, are in control. That is, our geopolitical leaders and so forth, that kind of thing. But they're doing that, and we didn't get around to the possible positive sides. There are some positive sides to this evolutionary pattern that's there, and I would submit that the emergence of Homo sapien as a species was a positive development out of history. James Joyce's history is a nightmare. Evolution was a nightmare.
We're being self-serving.
Yeah, right.
So of course we think we're at the top of the heap. Do we move forward from other forms of life that maybe should have taken over?
We're all walking in a sea of bacteria. Everything is a bacteria, and it's all a seamless when we're all part of it. Everything.
We're dependent on it. People still antibacterial products are all the rage these days, but people don't realize that they're killing the good bacteria with the bad bacteria. Without bacteria, you wouldn't digest food. You wouldn't void all the bad stuff.
Yeah, and it's all interconnected like that. Also, the thing, I use it all the time. People get bored of hearing it if we listen with any regularity. But in a human organism, there's 100 trillion cells. 100 trillion, and they're all overlaid with DNA, and they've all got a pattern, and they all matter.
Right.
They all count.
Well, we're still learning whether they all count or not.
Okay, talk to me. What do you mean?
The human genome has been decoded.
Yes.
And they're still searching out strings that form chromosomes and so on. And they're finding a lot of what looks like fluff, cruft, excess, and we don't know what it's used. Is it necessary to be there? Is it just some sort of storage?
Oh, that's interesting, yeah.
As you said, once again, we're made up of 100 trillion cells, and the DNA itself is made up of, I don't know how many billions base pairs, so 3 or 5 billion base pairs.
I'm not sure the number,
It's some huge number.
Yeah.
And of course, they have found sequences that form chromosomes and so on, but they're finding a lot of stuff that doesn't seem to fit in.
Like the universe got a lot of dark matter.
Right.
No, most of it's all dark matter. They don't.
Well,
so there's still mysteries, and there probably will be mysteries, and it's probably good to accept a sort of an a priori sense mystery to the evolution of, or to the, well, then you start getting into things, people start setting up these systems of understanding what's it all about in religious terms or faith terms and that kind of thing.
They're very basic.
You're a humanist,
Yeah.
Are you a secular humanist?
Yes.
Okay. No.
There's some very base mysteries. There's no substitute for the common table salt because scientists do not know why we taste salt. They know how we taste salt, but they don't know why we taste salt.
We only have 4 tastes.
Yeah, they know where we taste it, but they don't know how we perceive that as salt. And very basic things that we just don't know. And are we meant to know them? Well, what would happen if we did? If we did know them, some corporation would obviously jump on, would obviously patent it, and would jump on some sort of, some sort of. We'd have a salt substitute overnight.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Don't they have salt substitutes now? And they have sugar. They have cyclamates and everything for sugar.
There is no salt substitute other than other salts.
Is that correct?
That's correct.
Dear me, I didn't realize that one. You know, but I mean they got.
My point just being that there are so many basic things that we don't know about ourselves yet.
Yeah.
Are we meant to ever know the entire human string of activity?
Well, perhaps we are. Mm-hmm. Or perhaps there's a fulfilling process. Like in evolution, Eldridge and Stephen Jay Gould and everything, they'll say that you have in the evolutionary process, you have quantitative change within a system. You have quantitative changes, and then when you get to the species, you have a punctuated equilibrium, and there's a new species. It's a creative thing that grows, and it's got singularities that go off and everything, but it's punctuated equilibrium. That happens rather quickly after quantitative change within the evolutionary process.
Where do we fit in at this
point
in our time?
I am of the opinion that we fit in at the apex, myself. Now, that's self-centered, and that's anthropomorphic and everything, but it seems to me that's by criteria that I hold dear, like consciousness and intelligence and understanding and knowledge and so forth.
At this point in time, we're poised to take off into something else then.
That's what I would think. I think we're coming to the end of the human experience. It's my sense that we're coming to the end of that. It's sort of like I don't know how you feel, but we're coming to the end of it in the sense of we've been gestating for 200,000 years, like an organism gestates in the womb for 9 months in a human pattern, 22 for an elephant.
So we've been gestating for 200,000 years, and we're time for us to move on, huh?
That's my sense, that we're going to come into a new relationship to the cosmos. It's like we had a level, Australopithecine had a relationship to the cosmos, Homo habilis did. And then there came a new relationship to it, and we may be transcending the relationship that we've had to the cosmos, mostly ignorant, but we're now getting down to where we have a great deal more knowledge, and we may be coming to the point of transcending that period and leaving the womb of where we've been and coming into a new relationship in a liberated order. James Joyce said history is a nightmare from which I'm attempting to awaken. We may be awakening as a collective whole in terms of a new relationship, a liberated relationship to the cosmos, which would be the averse side to the destructive scenario, which is there, that we, a collective species lethal suicide, which seems to be...
Are all 6 billion of us included in this?
I would think so, wouldn't you? Not only that, I think it would be all the 6, I'm just guessing or thinking and everything, but all the 6 billion, probably heading for 10. UN says we're going to level off about 10 billion 2020 or something like that. Heading for 10 billion, and that not only all of humanity, but all of humanity within the larger ecosystem of all of the creatures. And the whole system is probably going to reach a certain point of of liberation from a condition now that, we're reaching that point. That if we can do it like synergy, like a resonating relationship between the parts of a system, they're going to come together in a state like guys jamming. This is a metaphor. Yeah. But they're like jamming, and then you get a whole orchestra where everybody's playing. Humanity is so inefficiently organized now, and yet we have a capability to this, because the adverse side of that destructive capability is a technologically augmented capability of certainly answering all the ancient scourges and having enough for everybody in a material sense. We are transcending material scarcity as an ontologic reality on this planet, and we have institutions we've inherited out of history that are outdated by the zeitgeist and requires a new order, but we don't have a new way of operating, and that's why we're probably heading to destroying it all. Rather than liberating the context or allowing the new system or getting in touch with a visionary sense of how you can have a liberated order where you transcend scarcity, it's modeling, it's copy. That's what I think. Yeah, we're at that time. And if we get that in order, it's like everybody in the orchestra is playing, there'll be a resonancy that will inter-accommodate us like Teilhard de Chardin's Omega Point.
Well, I see
to the universe at a level transcended what we've been. It would be a collective whole relationship to a higher order of understanding in terms of anti-entropic function that biological process is in this part of the universe.
Well,
in general, that's
I
the way
see the order
it.
as part of the problem.
Okay.
Is that I think everybody needs to get back to their basics and take care of themselves. The order right now is being directed by corporatists, especially globally. And I think that's where their destruction is coming in, is that they have their own agenda. And it does not include the little person.
Right. Well, they are being differentiated from us then, in a sense like that. But I think I was seeing it as a collective whole.
Yeah.
And it's a problem that I would say that it's not the corporatists or the politicians. I would say that if there's a blame to be placed anywhere, if there's blame to be placed anywhere in terms of helping to, you know, the zeitgeist requires a certain new thing, a new idea, a new way of thinking, alteration, revolution, call it what it is. But the blame isn't with the guys that are running the politicians or the leaders. It's with the progressive intellectuals who are supposed to be coming up with a thing that's in touch with the zeitgeist requirements that is going to be able to effectively subsume and inform the institutions.
So you're blaming them for slacking off.
Right. No, the intellectuals.
Yeah, the intellectuals.
Us.
Yeah.
We're at fault for not providing an alternative that is so comprehensively appropriate that it will be able to be liberating of all of humanity within an ecological context. But we get all caught up in the dialectic because we're of who's to blame and so forth, and we don't. And that dialectic would have to be one which would be subsuming of those historically inherited institutions in a manner by which those responsible for those institutions are going to be included on their own terms like everyone else, and we don't have one that is inclusive enough of the whole thing. But seeing that they are not the leaders, they are going to be what is called a lagging indicator, because they are anchored with historical institutions that are going to be subsumed and superseded by an alternative provided by the progressive intellectual community, and the progressive intellectual community is all caught up in outdated ideas of how it's all the corporate's fault.
Well, here we go back to where I said that the basic human population in the world now is immature. So I never considered myself an intellectual. But having some capacity that I see that maybe beyond the norm, maybe a little above the norm, is that, yeah, I have slacked off. I haven't put forth what I think can be a benefit to society. I see that very much, in that whenever we defer to one person's idea or ideal and take off in their direction, is that we can be in trouble. Because the human species needs to have several directions going on. And that goes along with Darwinian theory also, is that we need to have several directions to lead into, and to find out what direction is going to enable us to procreate, enable us to go forward.
Or survive.
Survive, right.
Much less transcend.
Right.
And much less fulfill.
And that's where we're slacking off, is that no one has come up with a method for people to
or
survive.
an understanding. There have been some. Yeah. Chardin was good, Teilhard de Chardin, I think, with the idea of omega point,
but we have to
kind of thing.
And we need to keep out in the forefront and let people know that there are those of us who are thinking about this, and there are those of us who have some ideas, and maybe this will work, and maybe that'll work.
Well, who do we draw upon? Who can we draw upon in order for... Well, I like Fuller very much, Buckminster Fuller. I think he was a polymath of great.
Who we draw upon, we can only look towards our mass media, because how else do we learn of anything? And if our mass media is going to let us down, then we don't even learn that there are other ideas to pursue.
The mass media, you mean like...
your newspaper. You pick up a newspaper. If you don't read a little science blurb on the, in a near front page, then you're not going to learn. You're not going to learn of anything.
Well, it's a communications capability.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, there are things coming along that line that are kind of encouraging. We've got public access,
which is wonderful.
It is.
Yeah.
It truly is.
And there are a lot of people who realize the power of public access, and they realize that I mean, I flipped through some stations the other day at a friend's house, and I was thrilled to find 2 or 3 dozen open access stations.
It's getting better all the time,
Yeah.
too. And the quality of the discourse and the thing is getting better.
And you get people to stick on a channel for 10, 15 minutes, maybe they'll realize that, I do need to listen to this.
That's another issue, in a sense, in terms of so suppose we got communication. You got communication possibility. We've learned from our commercial networks that you can have all kinds of communication that doesn't communicate very much. It's very useful in terms of an advancing a process of understanding of what's going on.
Well, look at broadcast television. You want to see a lot of communication that doesn't mean anything.
It's a lot of, Mr. McLuhan was very good. I used to visit
Marshall
with
McLuhan,
him every spring. I never could get close to him, but he had a great, interesting,
He was a
wired
hard-nosed
mind.
along the lines of Chomsky, yeah.
Well, Chomsky, no, well, yeah, he wasn't so, Chomsky would be more political, I think, than Marshall McLuhan was. But I mean, he was just interestingly wired and drew upon poetry and all kinds of things and everything. But he would say the medium is the message, and he would say the existence and the conditioning effects of the media back upon consciousness is far more important than the message that's being conveyed, that sort of thing. But at a certain point, it comes down to where you have communications capability. We're getting more and more exponentially. It's coming out of the labs. We are going to be swimming. I think
we're already
going to be swimming in bandwidth.
Information.
No, information.
Information.
Information, and you can get information overload.
It's all about
Norbert Wiener noted, but he also noted information overload within a system permits pattern recognition of a higher level of understanding. You're overloaded in a system, but if you're up here, you can see that overloaded sense within that system can be seen as part of a larger pattern, comprehensive understanding, which is part of another level of, it permits pattern recognition at another level. So maybe we have people that, so we got that, but we still need to have then some ideas or thoughts or understandings that have some coherence in terms of helping to get things in order, and we don't get it from our political leadership or from our business leadership, nor would you expect to get it from them. Would you expect leading understanding?
You expect that seed of uniqueness, that seed of something that original, to be able to think about and to say, maybe this is something we can look into.
Well, it might but it wouldn't come from the business class or from the political class. It would come from like Voltaire or from a lead.
There's no reason why it can't come from a leader.
Okay.
You can have an intellectual leader. It would be very nice to have intellectual leaders.
We don't have any.
No, we don't have.
We don't have any. That's what I'm trying to say.
It doesn't draw that type of person.
Those that are concerned with the human condition, trying to improve it, perhaps, and so forth, we're so busy reacting to the inappropriate way in which things are being done by our so-called leaders
being reactive as opposed to
we're being
proactive,
reactive
as opposed to
rather
proactive.
than being able to challenge that system.
Right.
And they just are able to assume historical legitimacy. They just assume that they are historic. They ask the world to assume that, let's say, the United States, or what we're doing in Iraq, or what we're planning to do in Iran, or what we're doing, something like that, at a political level. They just ask us to assume that what we represents historical legitimacy, the march of history.
And they don't look beyond the past 20 years.
They call that the international consensus.
Yeah.
And it's not. It's the international consensus of a few people who own a lot of assets and have a lot of power within systems that are outdated.
And it's outdated from 20 years. So they only have to go back 20 years to realize what they're doing is wrong.
Oh, okay.
I'm talking about not learning from history.
You're talking specifically Iraq.
Yeah, well, not just Iraq.
The problems are legion everywhere because the system is out of date with what's required.
It doesn't. It's bogged down.
Or so it should be challenged. They should not be able to assume this idea in people's minds of historical legitimacy.
Well, the ability to challenge now is being written into law. The inability, they're trying to make it so that you can't challenge the status quo, and that's being written into law these days. Is that people are not allowed to speak out. You're not allowed to be. You're not allowed to
Or as
the
their
challenge.
dire circumstances. We don't need no habeas corpus, like Sierra Madre. We don't need no...
We don't need no stinking badges.
Yeah, we don't need no stinking habeas corpus. It's absurd.
Yeah,
I think the kids are seeing it in absurd terms in a way, or are they? I don't know.
They are. They're not stupid. They're treating them on. They're treating the new
and
generation.
they're treating humanity as so stupid.
They're treating the modern generation.
We're like a bunch of slaves.
I have a 22-year-old, and he says, "Yeah," and I can see it in him. Is that he's not stupid, and of course he's not going to respect your laws because he knows that you don't respect him. How do we expect the youngsters to behave when we're treating them the way we do?
Not many youngsters, the whole of the world. Why do we look to those kind of people and expect vision?
I think a lot of us,
without vision you can perish.
Because we look, I think for the past generation we've looked at people, we've looked at sports stars and film stars for visions because that's what we've been conditioned to. And of course they don't have visions. I mean, sports stars are jocks. How come we're looking to them for some sort of intellectual stimulation when they're anything but intellectuals?
Yeah, it's not. It's a celebrity thing.
Right.
Yeah, something to differentiate you from the mass.
And Reagan personified that. I mean, he may have had some good ideas, but was he intellectually stimulating? I don't think so. I mean,
I had run-ins with Mr. Reagan when I was in California. I don't want to even go into that, but I mean, but there were, no, but it's the now where are we falling down? What are the things? I mentioned to you that I have a great interest in Buckminster Fuller as a comprehensive, Marshall McLuhan, and then things come down political and that kind of thing. And we have now this 9/11 truth movement that's growing. That's beginning to get
morphing into more of a truth movement because we realize that
beyond 9/11 truth
we have
to a truth.
Yeah.
Well, please spell it out. Yeah.
Well, because we have to realize that there's more to it than we have to gain the support of others. Because you say 911 and people conjure up this horrible event that happened, and they continue to see people who deny the official story as conspiracy theorists. We call ourselves alternate theorists because we have ideas that are based on scientific reasoning.
Yeah, Mr. Griffith is really very scientific, impeccable in credentials academically.
And the fact what it comes down to is the fact that we've been told a series of lies over the past couple of decades by the cabal that's in power now. And why do we continue to believe them?
How wide is that cabal? Is that the neocons, or is that the whole political process include, let's say, the Democrats and Republicans and the political establishment?
Okay, well, the cabal I'm talking about directly is the neocons, because they're the ones that are directing. They seem to be directing the current direction of our constitutional rights and laws.
Wolfenson's been talking about Iraq from the 70s.
Right, right. You can go back to the 70s and realize
I understand that dialectic. But, I mean, can you spread that out and say that it's not only them and the thing between the Democrats and so forth and that the system... It's a systemic thing.
It's a need to maintain the status quo. And the status quo is, of course, directed by pockets, deep pockets. And that deep pockets goes back to corporatists and, of course, our political system as a whole.
Now, we have a political system. Let's just spell it out. We have a political system that goes back to, let's just say, 1776.
It was never democracy. It was always a representative republic. It was never democracy.
I know.
And people call us a democratic republic, and we're not a democratic republic.
No, it's a representative.
It's a representative republic, and you go back to our first election, which was for the second president, Washington having been fairly appointed by the Constitutional Convention.
Washington seemed to have been a very sterling figure. But
he was an absolutely sterling figure and a humanist, if we want to look back at it that way.
Really? Yeah. He was a deist, though, I think, no?
Yeah. Yes, he was.
Yeah. Anyway,
go back to very few of our founding fathers had deep religious convictions. They had humanist convictions that were Christian in nature, but very few of them actually attended specific churches.
An alarming number of them had human slaves.
Yeah, and
slavery for crying, chattel slavery for crying out loud.
And several of them have written about how uncomfortable they were with the institution of slavery, but it was accepted at the time. And, of course, you had those who had slaves but didn't treat them as slaves. They were household help.
Well, those are house slaves. Yeah,
Right.
those are ones that if you get close with Mr. whoever,
And you may, and we may very well be
you
descended
can
from
saddle
someone
up
who
to
we
and try
wouldn't
and
want to
curry
admit to.
favor and be nice, and
Yeah.
that's what they do within the corporations now.
Right,
And you can
right.
to those who own
Yes, the
everything and
brown
have all the
nosers,
power,
yes,
that kind of
and-
thing.
yes.
Yeah, they have that kind of thing. But I think we live in a situation where, in a certain sense, in terms of a liberated human spirit, where people are really liberated to be on their own terms and everything, we're still we're in bondage. The masses of the world are in bondage to a few people who own all the assets that are responsible
yes.
for the production.
We're conditioned
of,
through public education from the
right.
very beginning.
I think that's what education
yes.
is largely about, is to teach
Yes.
you to respect an authority figure so you'll fit in to
So
cubicle
you'll fit
corporate
in, so
world and
you'll-
do what you're
yes,
told,
you will stay
like
in
a good,
line.
Draft horse.
And by the time you finish graduate school, you think you're liberated, when
Yeah.
actually it's just you've been conditioned for the past 20 years.
Your only liberated degree, you can suck up to one of those people
Right.
that really have all the
because
power.
the only place to go from here
And
is
that's a
to go to
small little
people-
group.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Well,
And
but-
so it's a plutocracy. We should not talk economically, particularly.
Yeah, it's a
and
plutocracy.
which is more important, politics or economics? I wonder. Which informs which? They used to be called political economy in the old days, but in the 19th century.
That's a
but
good question. What's
they're
more
very
important?
interrelated. But economic, we have a little bit of a truncated. We get to vote every 4 years, and they're going to take that away by not having electronic voting and things like that. They can jimmy that maybe and everything like that. It's really absurd theater, this is.
Yeah.
But economically, it's absurd. There's just a small group of people who own all the assets. They got a lot of running dog hirings in all their law firms and all their corporate structures and everything, but it's those few people who set the template, and we're all picking up leaves on the estate of these few people who own everything, and we seem not to have any challenge to that at any
one steps up.
systematic level
Yeah.
that is effective in terms of...
You want to go back to the 1930s, and effectively people have argued that this country has been bankrupt since 1930 because we went to the central bankers and were bailed out by them.
Mm-hmm.
Where J.P. Morgan and company actually own everything. Everything.
Well, it's still just, and it's not only here in this country, it's in every political entity and the world structure. It's a small group of people who own the assets in every political entity in the world, virtually.
Well, you can see,
and they live in gated communities, and they live very well, and then they have a whole raft of people who will be sycophant to them.
well, I
and
call
fit
it
into
Western.
their
Yeah.
institutions.
I call it
But
Western
it's not-
influence, when it's not just. And I've only just recently realized that it's not just Western influences. Of course, you've got these cabals in other countries.
Oh yeah.
But
Look
it's-
at the commies in
what-
what's
right.
going on in China.
What it is a very small club. Is
Yeah.
that you have these very powerful people who have agreed to act in concert.
Yeah, and they have, and those are they get hirelings or satraps or people who will fit into their thing, and it's like mafia dons.
And it's what the modern truth movement is trying to point out to, and is actually helping tear it apart, is that everybody picks on their own group of their own cabal to have street actions against, or to pick on, to hold your signs up against.
It's hard. You know that you.
And who do you do it with?
Yeah, right. Or where do you begin?
Where do you
attacking
begin?
it?
Right.
It's really funny. You know, I like Ramsey Clark a lot. You know, he's been there, International Action Center,
Yeah.
and those people down there are so great. I remember coming back on a trip to Libya. I have a great liking for the country of
Which is
Libya.
very
I mentioned that
interesting.
to you.
Yeah.
But I've been there,
I'll
and I
have to do
came
some
back.
more research
Gabrielle,
on
one
it.
of the gang, were coming back, and they used to camp out on Ramsey Clark's law office floor. All these people, Brian Becker, and all these guys. And everything like that, and they came back and they said, "We finally got a place.
Huh?
We finally got a
We
place."
finally got a
And we
place.
went there, and they said, "So what's the reason for the place, the International Action Center?" "We're going to attack injustice."
Right.
And it was, I said, it was really, now, here's the black injustice, here's the ladies' injustice, here's the this injustice,
Where
the
do
Puerto
you
Rican,
start? Where do you start?
it's systemic.
Yeah.
It's the whole elephant.
And you know what? It's not going to be effective until you include that bottom third, until you include the common man, the populist people.
On a world scale, it's
On a
more
world
than that.
scale,
I think it's
yeah.
more. You got half the population on less than $1 a day or something,
Right, and
$2 a
it's-
day.
and no-
I mean, the mass of the world, and in that metaphor with the human organism, all cells matter, and we are just going to write off. And now that the technology is taking over the productive process increasingly, because they own that technology, everybody's a wage slave, essentially. And some of them get paid more than others, like house niggers, right? They sit on the plantation. Some of them, they can saddle up and make a little something.
Like water wars in Bolivia, where you got the corporations own the water. I mean, how do you fight that?
Right.
How do you fight that without blood?
Right. Well, but that's what they've got. But the thing is that through time, this is another wrinkle, because through time, like in Tom Jefferson's time, there was probably only, so that means you got people with assets. They own the assets, and that includes technology and everything except human labor. And you got labor. And in Tom Jefferson's time, probably only 10% of the actual production was anything other than labor.
Yeah,
there was nothing.
Probably less than
there
that.
was no mass-produced anything. I was thinking of it the other day. There was nothing mass-produced. Now everything's mass-produced. Well, and if you draw a line through time from there, you go like this. It's probably, now there are charts that say that in terms of the production of the modern economy and the trends therein, it's probably only something like 15% of the actual production of what's going on has anything to do with human labor.
Well, you look at the price of anything in the store.
And that's not just physical. That's not wheelbarrows. That's also intellectual. And now we got programs coming, autodidactic. I mean, no, not autodidactic. What do you call autonomous? Autonomic programs coming that will be able to displace the labor input to the productive process, and for the mass of the people who have no ownership of anything. They are now being so, it used to be in Aristotle's day, they needed to have slaves. You had to have slaves to live somewhere. They're getting to where they won't even need the slaves in order to live in their 10-star hotel gated communities, so they can kill them or let them die. I mean, in a very cynical way, they don't need them because the labor input, and still the progressive community, all they talk about, and we accept the idea that it doesn't matter that this is all owned by a few people, the ownership, because on the left they get the idea, well, we're going to have a socialist thing, and private property or ownership is an evil institution. So we get snookered, and all the power and all the assets.
You couldn't possibly push that in this country.
I beg your pardon?
You couldn't possibly push a socialist property law
No,
in this
but
country.
the progressive community tends to be in this labor theory of value. They've got even a surplus labor theory of value. We can't have any ownership. That's for them, and we're workers, and we're going to make a workers' revolution. We're going to socialize everything, is the only answer that they have, and that doesn't seem to be adequate to what's required. Why we let them get away with that, I don't know. Or what, fill me in, you're progressive, you're thinking about it, the 9/11 Truth Movement's trying to give a critique that's relevant. And is it possible to have a critique of the system that is so inclusive that it also includes the system and subsumes it, and hoist them on their own petard, rather than just reacting to the manifest inadequacies of the system that they go along with, and don't expect anything to come from them? It's not going to come from them. But do you understand what I'm trying to say?
Well,
how are we going to ever challenge it rather than just react endlessly to the absurdities by which they operate?
You have to make people see that you're being lied to. We have to make you think self-reflectively and self-introspectively.
Yeah, or critically.
Critically.
Yeah.
Because you're not going to change anything until you realize that you're being lied to. You can't
lied
to.
That's a strong word.
Outright lied to, and that people have to realize that. Because, as you say, who do you attack? Well, attacking anybody or any organization is just not effective. They have all the power. They have all the strings.
Right.
It needs to be a popular revolt where people realize that they're being lied to.
Lied. Now wait a minute. Lied. Okay, lied.
And anyway, you go to a concrete, physical example. Go to a store and look at two products, and you wonder why they're priced that way. So the price of something has its cost of production these days. It's all a marketing tool to just separate you from your money, but that's another attitude. People need to realize that they're not being told the truth about where they can end up and how they can move forward, and they're not in control of themselves. That people have to realize that they are in control of their own destiny. And until they realize that they're being lied to, they're never going to understand it.
Mr. Bush says to his critics that you have to have an alternative to the surge. Have you got an alternative to the surge? That's what he'll say. You got an alternative. And
sure, there's an alternative surge. Pull everybody out.
The people with that. Okay, but the people that are in that position of response and claiming legitimacy.
And
they've got legions of lawyers.
We've given them the response.
And they've got legions of the people who will set it.
We've given them the responsibility.
But there were people like that in powdered wigs in in Versailles in 1789 in France. And they thought that they were legitimate. They had a thing in order.
Well, they knew they were legitimate. They didn't think they were legitimate.
No, they claimed legitimacy.
Yeah.
We're legitimate historically.
They knew they were legitimate.
We are the tide of history. We are the advanced one. Now, the United States of America, my contention is, the United States of America, which just assumes legitimacy, historical. We've got George Washington. We've got all these institutions. The Constitution is sacrosanct, all this kind of thing, that they may very well be presiding over a system and trying to impose a system upon the world
that doesn't work anymore?
That is as outdated as feudalism was in 1789 France. It is outdated for what the world requires because it serves really only and is directed only by a tiny plutocratic class, and they serve their own interests. It's outdated with what's required, and why we should allow them collectively to assume that position of legitimacy in the popular consciousness is something. Why aren't the intellectual challenges to that coming forth from the intellectual community in a realistic kind of challenge to that very premise?
Because the people in power are invested in the status quo. They can't buck the system, or they lose their power, they lose their pensions, they lose their children's future.
Everybody's vested in that. Because, you know...
From a bourgeois attitude, but look at the underclass. Look at the 40% of this population that doesn't have health insurance.
In this country you're talking. You're talking just this country. Extend it out to the world.
Right.
Extend it out to the world.
The people in power are so out of touch with the reality of the situation. You've got congressmen saying that they consider themselves lower middle class because they make $175,000 a year.
Is that all they get? Poor things. They should
Poor things. Isn't that bad? My honey works for Borders, and she makes $20,000 a year as a supervisor. And she has no possibility of moving forward because the company hires from the outside when it comes to managerial positions.
It's all social networking and things, you know, that goes on to where they get into those. Because if you start getting close to
if
where
you're not a member of the club, you will not move forward.
And the club is very small, really.
If you don't adhere to the company line, you are not going to move forward.
Right.
And so it's an upper crust bourgeois attitude at this point, because it's those people making $100,000 and above who are really controlling everything.
Oh yeah,
in that neck of the woods. Anybody under that is living basically a subsistence existence.
Yeah.
If you include housing and food and education and health insurance. I mean, how can you afford a health insurance if you're making $20,000 or $30,000 a year when your co-op policies cost $5,000 a year?
Much less about the people. There's 50,000 or 80,000 demonstrations in China last year against that gang in China. Yeah. They're living in 9-star hotels and stuff and gated communities, and they're going. It doesn't look very much like
the same thing in this country.
It doesn't. Yeah, I know. Yeah. But the point being, they used to be. Remember, they used to have this thing called communism.
Yeah.
Remember this thing? They had this guy called Karl Marx, and there was the whole world thought that there was going to be
a. They've embraced capitalism to the hilt.
And then the socialism. I mean, that Stalinistic thing imploded. Yeah. They're still hanging on, and now they got power, and they look very much like capitalists to me. Yeah. Don't they look like imperialists to you?
Oh, very much so.
Or at least they're certainly running dogs with the imperialists and so forth. And so that's a critique that comes.
They've got their hands on the pie also.
And then, so that means that there's not, so where does the challenge, if we're saying progressive, let's talk to the progressive community, intellectuals. I mean, I think of that, Jack London and Upton Sinclair and the Voltaire and, you know, people that have been critiquing of the way things are. Mark Twain and, you know, the kind, where are they now? What is the critique and what is the basic reason that they're not able to come up with is it anything about, you know who I like is Pogo? Remember Pogo? And it says, cartoons. We done found the enemy, and the enemy is us.
Right.
That it might be us, that we're not thinking it through in a way to be effectively able to bring a challenge to the absurdity. And you can't get it from the leadership.
No, it has to come from within.
You don't blame them for that.
People don't step out.
I don't think you blame. It's not their role to come up with something that's really relevant comprehensively. You don't blame a crocodile for eating an antelope.
Right.
But what you do blame are the people who are supposed to be coming up with the alternative.
Well,
where are the Buckminster Fullers?
You made them the crocodile, though.
Well, they made themselves that.
Well, no, you made it by voting for them. You made them the crocodile. You've given them that legitimacy, and people need to.
But to come back, well, Hitler was voted in 33, 37. He had a 97% approval rating.
Right.
You know, that kind of thing.
Something to think about.
Yeah, maybe this species isn't ready to speciate yet. After all, maybe
we aren't ready for a.
But the thing is, in a pregnancy and a gestation, come 9 months, it has a time.
Right. So
and when you get a thing where
we've
you've
had
got
a 200-year gestation,
it
and
may
it's
be
time.
we're meant to entropy. Yeah. You know, we're meant to enter, but. You know,
well, like I mentioned before, I think 200 years is the lifetime of any republic.
Well, I'm thinking not only in terms of the historical, I'm thinking in terms of the evolution of consciousness. Yeah. We're coming to a point where we can wipe it out.
Yeah.
Now, that's something new. We couldn't do that in the 6th century B.C. or anything, or 6th century A.D., or apparently not even 1945. There would be some survivors of this species that would carry on somehow. But now, apparently, that is not the case.
I'd like to
now,
think
we
that
could
there
take
was more
the thing and
thought,
say, oh,
too.
we'll never do that.
I'd like to think that there was more thought given to the human condition back then, too, is that we thought about the numbers more. Okay, we're going to kill 20, our method here is going to instantly kill 10,000 people, where we're going to save 100,000 lives. Mm-hmm. And there was a lot more thought given to that. As I hear now in Iraq, some people think, some scientists and experts think that we have killed upwards of over 500,000 people.
I know, the Lancet study, yeah. And now we're going to surge, and now we're going to maybe bomb Iran.
Yeah, so
and that kind of thing. Yeah, all of that. But the thing is that, you know, I can't believe it. We're out of time. We only just got to the point where we're maybe thinking
on a roll.
How do we do it? I think I think Muammar Gaddafi might be interesting in terms of he's got a system where they've tried to attack the wage system in terms of distributing income. Everybody has to become an owner of the asset base. And the assets are what's creating the wealth. I think we have to challenge the very premise of the idea, as a founding idea, the labor theory of value that informs all economic theory, and therefore the political process should be challenged at a basic level.
How many letters do communism and community have in common?
How many letters do comedy? I mean, I don't know. I can't.
The first 7 letters.
The first, yeah, that's right.
And people talk about this loss of community. Mm-hmm. Maybe we need to rethink this communism idea. Is that it's not all bad. There's a lot there.
Well, perhaps.
There's a lot there that'll definitely forward the human condition.
Oh, perhaps so. But I had a thing with Becker one time. We have to run the credits. I'm sorry we run out of time.
Okay.
It's great talking
we
with
can
Dan
do this again sometime.
Nalven, but I had a thing with Brian Becker, and he says, I think everybody ought to read the Communist Manifesto, the first 2 chapters. We had a couple minutes at the end of it. And I said, well, that's good. There's only been about 10 trillion copies, and it was everywhere in the world and everything. But my own personal thing, I think everybody, the real challenge is there's a book called The Capitalist Manifesto. And there's about 3 copies around, and they're maybe available somewhere. But I think that's far more radical than the Communist Manifesto. We've tried that. I don't think it works. I think we're going to have to come up with something that's got a little more panache in terms of how we can challenge those
maybe better
systems.
Balanced. Yeah.
That's Louis Kelso, and that's also Muammar Gaddafi. Yeah. May be an example of a country that's in advance of where we are, the same way the United States was in advance of where feudal Europe was. That's my own thinking, but
well,
those are big.
If you're going to push Muammar Gaddafi on our current administration, I think you'd end up in jail very quickly.
It may be. I've been there before.
Yeah.
We'll meet you on the barricade,
yeah.
Right? Anyway, so we're running out of time. It's your pleasure to have the perceptions in. Daniel, I'm sorry I got off on a thing, but there's things that are worth talking about.
We need to talk about it. It needs to
I
be
think the progressive community should be thinking really wide and thinking about new ideas in terms of how we're going to be able to present a challenge to this absurd reality that they're asking us to accept as legitimate. That's all. Yeah. That's a basic premise. Yeah. What the details are is another question, but labor theory of value is a target that I would really start, or the surplus labor theory.
We got to think of how it's going to get implemented.
Yeah, well, no, I think we have to get the ideas first.
Yes.
We have to get our ideas straight.
But people don't think critically. They need to see that there's a possibility of it being implemented, or people just brush things off.
No, well, okay. No, I think I'm less involved in terms of what to do anything.
Yeah, I'm